This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
I know you won't be surprised, Real Talkers, to hear that Alberta is stealing more political headlines across the country. You probably know this is Canada's most engaged talk audience, that Alberta's government fired basically every C-suite executive, the board of AIMCo. That's Alberta's, essentially the pension management. This is the team that manages well over $100 billion in assets. Many of your pensions are involved here. The provincial government says AIMCo's been underperforming and they've been getting overpaid. And so they cleaned house just a few days ago. A new name, though, has popped up, a very familiar name. A former Prime Minister of Canada. It sounds like Alberta's Premier, Finance Minister, may be tapping Stephen Harper on the shoulder to lead AIMCo moving forward. And that's just the beginning of what's happening in our neck of the woods. Graham Thomson, veteran of political columnist, is going to be joining us in just about 30 seconds to dig into it all. Plus, have you seen this story about the widow that's basically fighting a notable charity over her and her husband's estate? You heard this, the $40 million fight involving Rotary and Mary McEachern. I've got a few thoughts on this. I think you might as well. Talk about a tough look for a charity. I'm curious to know where Real Talkers will land on that in the live chat. That's coming up in this episode. Right now, I want to remind you that if you're considering a new career in real estate, you're looking around, you see those listing signs on your street, and you go, gosh, I'd love to be one of the folks pounding those signs into the lawn and then showing up a little while later and proudly slapping that sold sticker on that sign. I'd love to help people buy or sell the perfect home. I'd love to choose my own hours. I'd love to have unlimited earning potential. Check out Relo, Alberta's top online real estate school at relo.ca. Now, to qualify for a real estate license in Alberta, you've got to take a couple of pre-licensing courses, a fundamentals course, a practical course. Nobody does it better than the seasoned team of experts at Relo. And get this, if you use the promo code Ryan100, that's all one word, Ryan100, they'll knock $100 off both the Alberta residential and commercial real estate bundles. That's Ryan100 when you kickstart your new career at Relo.ca. Graham Thomson, for years, has been covering Alberta politics, most notably right now for the Toronto Star, for Alberta Views magazine, and we always love when he makes time for us here on Real Talk. Thanks for joining us in studio. It's nice to see you.
It's my pleasure.
So this AIMCo story is a hell of a thing, and there's been a lot of talk around pensions in Alberta. This government, Danielle Smith's government, has been saying that they'd be open to, they want to manage Alberta's pension independently from the rest of the country. And is this the first couple of steps forward toward that?
Well, that was the assumption by people. Because the thing is, the government moves so quickly and aggressively on this. They fire the board. And it's not as if they're saying, look, we have somebody who's an expert in pensions who will step in to run this. No, the finance minister, Nate Horner, is the one who'll be sole director. And then they appoint the government's top civil servant, Ray Gilmore, as the CEO. So they have direct control over it. And they're saying, look, there'll be no decisions made on investments by Nate Horner. There'll be a new board brought in. But people are thinking, well, pensions, when it comes to pensions, the context is so important in Alberta. And you're right. You have the Alberta government really wants to push ahead with an Alberta pension plan, get money out of the Canada Pension Plan. The big thing there, we're waiting for a number from the chief actuary, the federal government. The province said expects to get $334 billion from the CPP. That's more than half all the money the CPP has.
For the entire country.
Right. But the thing is, no one's taking that seriously. There's numbers now more like $90 to $100 billion, and the government's waiting for that. So you have a question was put to Horner, does what's happening at AIMCo tie into the plans or the proposal for an Alberta pension plan? He is saying no. But there's so many questions right now because you go back, another issue here, without getting into too many details, the AIMCo, $170 billion.
They're managing right now.
$169 billion, but call it 170, let's round up. What's $1 billion? So they have that money, 24 is from the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, a rainy day bank account. We also have money for 375,000 public civil servants, okay? Like teachers, for example, their money was rolled under about 5 years ago. They did not like the fact that AIMCo controls their money, but that's what happened. So you have this idea that there's a lot of money in there. And when it comes to, if the government's being honest here, this has nothing to do with the pension plan. There's also, I've talked to people in government, another issue potentially is the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. The government could have more control over this by putting in their own, their board committed maybe to the government having some goals to invest more in Alberta. Last summer, the Premier talked about we could maybe use the Heritage Savings Trust Fund money to de-risk investments in projects that are having trouble raising money. She's also talked about increasing the value of the Heritage Savings Trust Fund to $250 billion by 2050. So you got to wonder, and I've talked to people in government are thinking, is this a way for the government then to get more control over Heritage Savings Trust Fund? And the problem is, look, the issue here is the government would love, I think, to have money to invest in Alberta directly, but then you're putting all of your eggs in a basket. Imagine if you have a pension in AIMCo. Now, the government's saying those two are not connected, but if you have money from the Heritage Savings Trust Fund going into investments in Alberta, then you're not really divesting your portfolio very well. And this is more a political move. And then you have Stephen Harper, his name popping up. So the fear right now, and the speculation, there's lots of speculation because the government hasn't been really transparent on what's actually going on. This happens, a coup. I called it a coup in my column for a potential coup in my column in Toronto Star because it moves so quickly. So the question is, what are they really up to? Is this tied to the Alberta Pension Plan idea? Horner says no, but is there a plan to use the Heritage Savings Trust Fund money to start investing more in Alberta? And if they appoint a board that's leaning that way, they can still call it arm's length, but wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and you bring in Stephen Harper, who, to my knowledge, is not an expert in pensions or running investment companies. Then you have another friend inside doing potentially the wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Has there been precedent for this in past? I mean, I like off the top of my head, it's probably a bad example, but I remember on principle, now we're talking 170 billion. Jason Kenney invested $1 billion of public dollars into Keystone XL.
Yes.
I think is a show of support for it. As far as we can tell, that billion may be lost, though who knows with the Trump presidency. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But is there precedent for governments taking steps like this, or I might use the loaded word, meddling in pension funds or provincially managed money?
One of the big issues about the pension plan is that Quebec has its own pension plan. It was never part of the Canada Pension Plan, and they have best return on investments, but also can you help out the Quebec economy? And there was a question, like, would Alberta follow that? The adage that, let's get the best return, but also maybe we start investing more in Alberta. And Horner was saying yes, maybe, then no, then yes, then no. It's not really clear because the precedent could be follow Quebec, where they do actually have sort of a directive to help the provincial economy. And so could that happen here? Absolutely. And you get the sense from the rhetoric and the comments from the Premier, especially de-risking things. Is this a move then to potentially use more of investment money to help out the Alberta economy? Now, you might think that's a good idea, but when it comes to investing things, like AIMCo has offices in New York and London, global. The Canada Pension Plan does really well. It's a global, it invests around the world. You don't want to start investing too much in your own backyard.
I mean, I barely know anything about money management. Actually, I know nothing about money management, but I do know people say diversify, and you wonder if that strategy might be at risk here. I'll credit the Financial Post for reporting on some numbers here on how AIMCo's performed for some perspective. Last year, 2023, AIMCo delivering an investment return of 8% or just under $9 billion on the balanced fund. This was a bit lower than its benchmark of 9.3. But if you look at over the years, AIMCo's total fund reporting a return of 6.9% last year, coming up short of the benchmark of 8.7%. If you zoom out, longer-term performance of AIMCo's balance fund has been better relative to benchmarks. Its 10-year return, 7.3%, outperforming a benchmark of 6.9%. The 5-year net return, I know this is a lot of numbers, but 6.6%. Just topping the benchmark of 6.5. So that's where we are. That's the tail of the tape. Yeah,
so you have the government saying they wanted to have high returns, like more like 8.5, 9%, not 6 7%. So it hasn't been, it's not as if it's losing money. It's still making money. Of course, then you go back during the pandemic 4 years ago, they did lose $2.1 billion investing in a very volatile market when the pandemic hit. They lost $2 billion. The government is saying is two things. The returns haven't been hitting benchmarks, but experts are saying, hey, they're not that far out. The second thing is the cost. Wages are going up for the executives. The staff, the number of staff is increasing. And then there's that sense that, well, they are actually hiring third-party investors. So there's the idea, well, look, we're paying you all this money, you're getting this money, but you're actually farming some of the work out to other third-party investment experts.
Right.
So the government's saying the cost is too high, the returns are not great. But you look at experts, look at the stories, Financial Post and others saying, what is going on? Because they move so quickly and so aggressively. And experts are saying, well, look, the way they acted, what's happening at AIMCo doesn't really, you can criticize AIMCo, spending too much, returns aren't as high as they should be. But to move this aggressively, why? And this is, of course, listen, when it comes to a vacuum, like nature abhors a vacuum, and of course, media loves a vacuum because you just fill it with all kinds of speculation. That's what's happening now. And then you have Stephen Harper's name pops up. And that brings all kinds of alarm bells saying, what is the government up to? And my column in the Toronto Star really was, is this just necessary house cleaning or a Machiavellian coup of some kind where the government has an agenda that is going to change things? So look back, the precedent here in terms of not being pensions, but the Alberta Health Services. When the Premier, when she became Premier and leader of the UCP, she fired the board.
Like she said she would.
Yeah, and boom, it's gone. And then she restructured the whole AHS. Now, that wasn't an election platform. She didn't come out and say, hey, vote for me, I'm going to blow up the whole healthcare system. But they are doing that. They're changing it dramatically. And so the question now is, what are they going to do with AIMCo? So this is still a big question.
Your column, people can read it at thestar.com. And Emboldened Danielle Smith has voters wondering what she's really up to. You've always been the master of the lead. Let me deliver it. Alberta's UCP government never sleeps. It's always up, always moving, always finding new things to chew on. It's the shark of Canadian politics. What else? Much like sharks, let me work with your metaphor. What else is happening below the surface that people aren't seeing because the fin hasn't hit yet?
Yeah, well, that's just it. Okay, first of all, the whole pension plan. What is going to happen with the Alberta Pension Plan? And I got to say on that issue, I talked to people inside government who know what's going on. This is a few weeks ago. This is before the AIMCo. In fact, it was like 10 days ago, right before AIMCo hit the news headlines. And they are determined to move ahead with the pension plan, at least the referendum. Okay, so the idea here is that, yes, referendum, we promised a referendum on the pension plan. They're waiting for that number out of Ottawa, the chief actuary, in terms of how much money will they get. Alberta is saying we deserve $334 billion. No one believes that. If it's more like $90 to $100 billion, the Premier said a few months ago, then we've got to rethink this thing. But they're committed to that referendum. So they're going to have to do the referendum, and the impression I got from people in government is, we'll do the referendum. If money is like $100 billion and people vote against it, then we've done our part, we've made our promise, fulfilled our promise, and they voted against it. And then, of course, an AIMCo happens 4 days later, and that changes the whole dynamics in this thing. So below the surface, the government still wants to go ahead with an Alberta Pension Plan, at least a referendum. And how does this play into it? We really don't know. Horner's saying the two things are not related. But then also, below the surface, it's popping up now. I had a source tell me a few weeks ago that the government could be running a deficit. I asked the Premier about that at a news conference. She said, yeah, a deficit's a real thing now. And this is something that's going to pop up. Speaking of fins hitting the surface, next year, February, the budget comes out. And right now, their budget surplus this year is an accounting surplus, $2.9 billion. Hey, we got money. Not really. They're borrowing money to make a surplus. It's an accounting surplus. So we hit, and the Premier's warning about this, we hit a deficit situation next year. What happens to all the spending promises? But also, to me, it's politics. You have a lot of public sector unions, right? The health workers, the UNA, for example, nurses, for example, teachers looking at pay increases. And if the government says, we haven't got the money, then that's one way of signaling to people there's a deficit coming. Ralph Klein used to joke that it's easier to govern during bad times because people believe you when you say no. If you're saying we've got a surplus and you really don't, you got to then convince people don't ask for more money because it's not going to be there. So these are all things that are popping up. We'll see how it goes into the next budget period.
For the government to save itself, I don't know what a referendum would cost, but if you pull people out, I'm going to call it $25-30 million, to run it on its own, you have to assume that they would hope to have the numbers by the next municipal election. You run the referendum during the next municipal election. It's the first. I don't mean to sound like I'm, some sort of conspiracy theorist, but you have to wonder if there's some strategy here. It'll be the first municipal election in Alberta history with political parties represented. Potentially, if you have strength behind conservative political parties in the municipal election, you draw more people to that election. You have more conservatives or people that might be more wired to accept a plan or to be more keen on a provincially managed pension fund coming out to vote. You're drawing your people out to that referendum more effectively. Can you see that being part of the strategy?
Yeah, and that number should be coming, though, this fall. We keep waiting for it. It's that number from the federal government. They could have a referendum. Of course, it makes more sense to do it with an election next year. It gives the government, of course, almost a year to do its pitch.
It's marketing.
Exactly.
But imagine the pushback. I mean, this would be...
That's just it. Like, half of Albertans, it's continuous, half of Albertans are saying, absolutely no way, do not mess with my pension. Leave the Canada Pension Plan money alone. Now, then polls are showing 1/4 are in favor and 1/4 don't really know. But the Premier, in her rhetoric, she's putting up 1/3 want it, 1/3 don't, and 1/3 are undecided. No, it's more like half don't want it. And it's hard, it'd be a tough sell, especially that number from the federal government. If it's not anywhere near $300 billion, and it won't be, if it's more like $100 billion, tough sell. But then you bring back to AIMCo this whole idea of what could they be doing to try and monkey with the numbers. And I'm an opinion columnist. I can say these kind of things because based on what's happened in the past and the rhetoric, the context from the government is very much in favor of a pension plan. So there's all kinds of questions being asked right now, and there's not a lot of answers coming from the government.
So you've got this situation here, and obviously it's gonna draw people out. Like we've already got lawn signs in our neighborhoods, like not a million of them, but hands off my pension. I can think of 5 or 6 we see when we're walking our dog. It kind of reminds me potentially of the hornet's nest that Jason Kenney and the UCP kicked, and that this government under Danielle Smith apparently are continuing to kick. We had a great conversation last week with one of your fellow Alberta Views contributors back in the day, Kevin Van Tighem, talking about what's going on with coal exploration on the eastern slopes, coal mining in the Rockies, but that really lit a fire under Albertans, including many Albertans who would typically be UCP supporters. Right? And you kind of wonder if this might go sideways. I will say, anecdotally, this is not a referendum. Among my circle of friends, there are people that are like furious that this is even being discussed, and there are some people that are like, I'd like to see it. So I'm not going to say that this would land at a 0, but a referendum is a democratic way to do it. I'd be curious to see what the final result looks like. I suspect that most people, when you're talking about their retirement funds, their nest egg, their own financial security, you don't want shakeups. You don't want bold new moves. You don't want your money to be used to de-risk projects that haven't drawn private capital or other sources of funding, right? I mean, I think that's where the average person, like a public servant that taught in a classroom or drove a city bus or what have you for like 40 years, that's not what they're going to be looking for. That's my guess.
Yeah, well, the thing is, referendum, they've committed to that. Now, the thing is, they do not want this to last until the next election. They do not want an election to be run on an Alberta pension plan. Like that's a loser when it comes to winning Albertans over. So they want to get this thing done beforehand. But one of the issues about referendum is that the NDP were moving to demanding it be a binding referendum, and the government said no. Now that has, of course, speaking of conspiracies, people thinking, okay, fine, if there's no binding resolution to the referendum, so if Albertans say no, the government could still potentially then move ahead with it. So these are things that Albertans will care about. Yeah, a lot of issues Albertans don't really care about. There's things going on in politics. You mentioned their pensions. They care about this. You mentioned, of course, coal mining in the eastern slopes of the Rockies. People care about that, especially you mentioned environmentalists, but also ranchers, people who normally vote UCP. You are absolutely right.
I think ranchers care more about it than anybody else, to be honest with you.
Yeah. So absolutely. So the pension plan is one issue that you're going to tread really carefully. So it's a case where they're going to say, here's the money. Albertans say no, and then it's over. But again, the context is the Premier really believes this is a thing that they have to do. This goes back to her days as a columnist, as a radio show host, where she said, Alberta, regarding a pension plan, we have a duty in this province to have our own pension plan. Not just it's a good thing to do, it's actually a duty to actually have this. And you have people who want it. In fact, some of her base members want it to be done without a referendum. And that was one of the issues that were popping up in lead up to her leadership review. There was no resolution to that effect, but people in her party, just go ahead and do it. We want a pension plan, a police force, all the other things that she's doing. And the pension plan is one thing that she knows she's got to tread carefully on.
Dwayne's in our YouTube live chat. We're talking to Graham Thomson. If you're listening on the Mixer live streaming audio app, Dwayne says Danielle Smith doesn't see that the Alberta Provincial Pension Plan, the Alberta Provincial Police Force got the Wild Rose defeated to Alison Redford in the Alberta PCs in 2012. Why is she pursuing it? I don't know if that's the exact reason why they lost in 2012, but what do you think about the comment?
The thing is, these things are being retreaded by Smith, and of course she won the election. An interesting thing, that 91.5% at the convention that she won the leadership,
the AGM,
they're treating that like she won 91% in a general election, because this party, this is something new, it's unprecedented. This governing party is treating resolutions from their members as directives, not just nice things, not non-binding ideas or suggestions that in the past were basically ignored. They're treating them like these are directives. Because I've never seen this before. Last, at the AGM on Saturday morning, there was an accountability session with Smith on the stage with two of her ministers going through resolutions from the previous years. For example, last year, going through all the resolutions in front of all these like 4,000 members, saying, resolution, okay, we've done that, we've done this, we couldn't do this one, but working on it, this one was already being done. She went through the resolutions as if this was the general public in a general election saying, what have you done for us? They're treating the non-binding resolutions as binding on the government policy. I've never seen that before, and she is going to be again there next year to sit down and say, here's the resolutions from 2024, here's what we did with them. Of course, that's what led to her socially conservative legislation on transgender and gender pronouns in schools, things like that, and giving nurses, for example, the ability to refuse to get a vaccine in a hospital. That all came from last year and her members pushing for that. And they've changed in government policy because of what the members want in her party. She didn't campaign on any of these things, but the members want it. And that's what's important to her.
This 91.5%, it's obviously a big number, and we heard from a lot of people, both in our live chat on the show and emails on social media when we're talking about it, saying, listen, I don't consider that 91.5% to be worth much because only those that attended the AGM were able to vote. The AGM had a cost barrier for some people, $400. The UCP wasn't approving memberships for everybody, not the first party to do that. What do you read into the validity of that 91.5%, and what sort of an impact, what sort of a message do you think it sends to the party itself, including some of those dissenting ranks, including on the right-wing flank?
Yeah, well, first of all, it shows that, of course, Danielle Smith, they played it. They were worried. They were worried about her not doing that well in the leadership review. And they brought people in. Of course, it was speculation and...
right, busfuls of people.
Yeah, and that didn't happen. There were buses of people, but they came from, like, Sherwood Park and these ridings. They brought their members
It's normal.
down.
That happens.
Yeah, that happens all the time. So... but the thing is, they were there. People that showed up were thinking there'd be more of a fight, and there wasn't. The Take Back Alberta wasn't an issue at all. You've talked to David Parker in the past. He was a co-founder of Take Back Alberta. They were pushing against her. They actually had the pamphlets they put out.
Yeah, he said publicly he was voting no in her leadership review.
Yeah. So that way to, he was saying, look, you got to keep these politicians in check. You got to get them worried a bit. But the thing is, the party didn't need him anymore. They can do their own right wing, move further to the right. 91.5%.
What, try to split the party again and start all over again and with a less compelling leader? I mean, it just doesn't, to me.
It doesn't, exactly. You go back in the past, okay.
Didn't Derek Fildebrandt try that like 5 years ago?
Well, the thing is, the big difference between people who were kicked out in the past, you're looking at, Ed Stelmach got 77%. The running joke is 77%. It's a kiss of death. He got 77%. Alison Redford got 77%, and they were both gone. Stelmach was gone, pushed up by his own party.
What was Klein, like 62 or something?
He got 55.
55.
The difference was there. He was not going to run again, But they said to him, give us a date. You're going to leave. Okay, fine, leave. But he wouldn't. So that 55% was like, Ralph, we love you, but my God.
Time to go.
He was going to go. They're just saying, go now. Stelmach and Redford, they were bussing people there as well. But the difference is they were both forced out afterwards by their own party, but there was people in the wings complaining about Redford in the party and speaking up sometimes very publicly against her. And look at Kenny. There's people speaking out against him from the caucus, not just Dave Parker type people. They were focused on getting him out. The big difference here is that there's nobody right now, there's nobody in caucus publicly or even like wink, wink, nudge, nudge speaking out against her. She's fully in control of that party. There was nobody waiting in the wings, but Kenny Smith was waiting in the wings. So was Travis Taves. There's no one like that right now. And they came out expecting to see a fight, and they brought people, and she did really, really well.
I do think that they have their future leader waiting in the wings. I do think that she could be the future premier of Alberta. But I do think that she's also loyal to the premier. You have any guesses on who you think I'm going to say?
Go ahead.
She's a cabinet minister. She's originally from Saskatchewan. She was in the leadership race. I think that Rebecca Schultz could be the next leader of Alberta's Conservatives. But right now, you don't get the sense that she doesn't support the premier one bit. She stands in solidarity with her.
Right now, she's in Azerbaijan for the COP29 climate change talks. Oh, yeah, listen. It's interesting. People who spoke against her, of course, in the leadership race now are very loyal to her. Brian Jeans.
Of course, everybody. 91.5, like it sends. And I understand, I understand why people that aren't keen on Danielle Smith, people that can't stand Danielle Smith, hate the fact that she scores 91.5%. I do think that people make some valid points around a limited base. Like it's not everybody voting. Like these are compelling and fair points. But I do think still that number lands with a thud to people that would come for the queen, so to speak.
Exactly. So people in the party, yes. Even those who thought she might get 65, 70, who are loyal to her, they were surprised. I talked to people before the vote. They were thinking 75, 80, so was I to get 91. That surprised them, but you're right. So, yes, people who don't like Danielle Smith, people who are not part of the UCP, even people inside the UCP who didn't turn up for that vote, that's, they have to look at that, and the party, you're right, is going to say, we are. She controls the caucus. The caucus is very loyal to her. She wins this big support from the party, and you can argue, of course, up and down, this does not represent, of course, Albertans, and it doesn't represent even the majority of members of the UCP. You think back to Jason Kenney. His vote was by mail. They mailed in, and like 16,000 people basically forced him out. This time around, there was very few people speaking out against her. So, this does show to the party that she is in complete control. And as I say, the problem is that the UCP tends to direct its attention to its members as opposed to the general public. And that could be a problem for her in the days ahead. And all depends, to me, my own theory of Alberta politics is all to do with the price of oil and gas. And right now, the premier is looking at a deficit. Yeah.
In our live chat, Michael says Harper is anti-public pension. We've got others saying that this is a patronage. Plain Power says this is no different than appointing Preston Manning. It's a huge gift to their patrons using taxpayer money. Others are pointing out that Pierre Poilievre is a supporter of the CPP and has gone on record, and this could potentially be something where Alberta's premier and the federal Conservative leader wind up at loggerheads. What might the consequence of that be? Where do you see that going? Because he's made no bones about it. He's spoken very plainly about how he feels.
He said, he prefer Alberta not leave. And this, again, it shows you when you have an Alberta Conservative premier and a Conservative prime minister, doesn't mean they get along on everything. You think back to Stelmach and Harper would fight over provincial jurisdiction. You had Stelmach saying, "Stay out of our backyard," to Harper. So Poilievre, now would he stand in the way? I don't think so. He's going to say we shouldn't be doing this, but I think he will let her do what she wants to do. But anyway, when it comes to federal-provincial relations, of course, the focus is often on Ontario and Quebec, British Columbia, and it doesn't mean things will be rosy for Alberta when if Poilievre, it looks like he will win next election if he does actually win.
Still election has to happen. I know some people get a little touchy when I refer to him as potentially the future or likely the future Prime Minister of Canada, but I do think that might be the outcome. How about Ms. KD on our live chat here on YouTube says the problem is that if we exit CPP, it's permanent. Another government could not opt in. That is true. So it is a permanent move. It's a decision that would be made on behalf of Alberta moving forward, obviously. Did you see I shouldn't sort of be smirking into noting that former BC Premier John Horgan passed away, 65 years of age, young guy.
Yeah.
Obviously, his illness is ostensibly why he withdrew from politics a while ago, paving the way for David Eby, of course. But did you see Pierre Poilievre's tweet about this? Did you see this? Sending heartfelt condolences to the family and loved ones of former BC Premier John Horgan on behalf of Canada's common sense conservatives. We wish peace and comfort at this time of loss for all his loved ones. Just like zero class.
Yeah, like
right?
why bring in partisan politics to
Come
this?
on, man. But I tweeted about it. I said he just can't help himself. Like it's just like even a note of condolence to a family
has to include,
respectfully, the body's still warm,
Yeah.
and he's already kind of campaigning on the grave. It just to me, I don't know. I just wonder like who. I get that the odd person might be like, but generally speaking, especially when you're the federal leader and you're speaking on behalf of party members, I don't know that most common sense people would love to see politics infused into notes of condolence.
Yeah, you should just leave it out. Like, say we're sorry that our thoughts and prayers, whatever, are with you.
Or don't say anything. I mean, if you can't help yourself but be snarky.
Right, yeah, but you should say something. The premier here said, we're sorry to see
prove that you and your comms team can keep it classy like once.
Yeah.
And
not,
How would you characterize Horgan's legacy, by the way? What are a couple of things that jump out at you, former Premier of BC?
It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting as well, speaking of government to government. NDP government in power here, NDP government in power in British Columbia. And you can see, like Horgan, we had the whole wine war. Remember that when Horgan was trying to do all he could to block the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion?
Yeah.
And then, because then Alberta government under Rachel Notley said, she retaliated by saying we're going to stop bringing bringing wine in from British Columbia. Yeah. And we got into this fight between two NDP leaders. Horgan is very well respected. He's did a lot for the NDP in British Columbia. But my point here is that even when you have governments of the same political stripe, NDP, they will clash, and they did clash over the pipeline. And then when you and Horgan stood his ground. Of course, the pipeline did go ahead. But it's like, again, with the Conservatives, Alberta Conservatives, federal Conservatives, if they're in power, that they will clash, sometimes head to head. But I think Horgan, he paved the way for the NDP. They almost lost it the last election. But I think that he is seen as somebody who has moved BC to more progressive stance. But the thing about British Columbia is the interior is very conservative,
big time,
and the West Coast is where the progressives are. And
but not all of them, right?
No,
I think of my farming friends in Aldergrove. They're not sending a lot of progressive politicians to Ottawa.
I went through Interior BC years ago for a federal election, and I was surprised just how conservative the interior was. But of course, it's the same in most parts of the country. In fact, the entire world. Cities tend to be more progressive. Rural areas be a lot more conservative in the rural areas, progressive in the cities. But yeah, Horgan, I think, is seen as a hero in BC. He stood up for the province against his own fellow NDP premier in Alberta.
We're talking to Graham Thomson, veteran political columnist. I've got a lot I want to ask you about, including the impact of Donald Trump's election victory, a resounding victory on Alberta, what it could maybe mean for Alberta's oil sands or other industries. He's talking a lot about tariffs. He campaigned on tariffs. What could that mean? Plus, the fall session at the Alberta Legislature, the new leader of the NDP, folks are probably wondering why it's taken us 40 minutes to start talking about Nayib Nenshi, but he's not in the House. I want to ask you if that actually matters. More with Graham Thomson coming up in just a little bit. Every week, courtesy of our friends at Tourism Jasper, we have an opportunity to find out exactly what's happening in Canada's treasured Jasper National Park. It's MyJasper Memories, presented by Tourism Jasper. And this is a really neat opportunity for you to see present-day Jasper, warts and all. This is Sundog's new tour, Wildlife of Jasper and the Ecology of Fire. Your chance to experience some of the most spectacular and awe-inspiring areas of Jasper and witness the dramatic and transformational effects of that recent wildfire back in July. You'll witness firsthand the resilience, the adaptivity of the animals, of course, the ecological rebirth of some of the most iconic landscapes in the Canadian Rockies. You'll explore the stunning beauty of Jasper National Park as you witness nature's incredible resilience. I keep hearing that word from folks that have been lucky enough to get back out there over the past number of weeks. Your tour will include a serene visit to areas untouched by wildfire, offering breathtaking views. You'll venture into fire-affected areas of the park, witness the impact of the recent fire, and, of course, observe the inspiring recovery that's underway. Experience ecological renewal as new life emerges amid the iconic Rockies. If you're like me, it feels like a gut punch every time you see those photos of that fire ripping around and then through town, but you'll see the regenerative effects of fire on old-growth forests and the wildlife that continues to reside there. Fascinating. Visitation has just recently begun to return, and so the park is experiencing a tranquility that's pretty unusual during this, what they'll call shoulder season. This is your chance to embark on a journey through Jasper's vast wilderness where thousands of acres provide a sanctuary for wildlife, elk, deer, moose, mountain goats, maybe even wolves or lynx if you're lucky, in their natural habitat. The tour is available for a limited time until November 30th, so you don't want to miss your chance. You can book directly at sundogtours.com or go to the show notes on the podcast or on YouTube. That's where you can book your Sundog Tour, Wildlife of Jasper, and the Ecology of Fire. Tag Real Talk RJ and MyJasper in your photos on Instagram, Twitter. We'd love to feature your Jasper memories in a future episode of Real Talk, presented by Tourism Jasper. Some folks say they were not surprised at all that Donald Trump won. Not surprised at all. They said the writing was on the wall. Harris ran a weak campaign. She wasn't even the candidate until a short time before the election. She was too tied to Joe Biden. She had tried to seek the nomination and passed and got whooped. You know, that's that position. Other people are going, oh my gosh, what happened? From early returns, early in the evening of November 5th, the entire map virtually was red. For all intents and purposes. Before we get into the impact of a Trump presidency on Alberta, on Canada, what were you thinking the night of the 5th? Were you predicting or expecting a Trump win? Where was your head at, and where was your head at the morning after?
Yeah, I didn't know what was going to happen because, again, you see experts saying he's going to win, others saying no, she's going to win because the public may not be saying that they're going to vote for her, but they're going to vote for her. I was not shocked by what happened. I was surprised because there was a certain sense that the U.S. might want change. And the thing is, they did want change, just not the change that she was offering. It was a change that he brought. So I wasn't stunned. The thing is, you've got to, if you're a politician, for example, or even watching these things, you got to be prepared for whatever happens. So I think the issue is the U.S., the Democrats can do a lot of soul searching as to what actually happened. The reality is, of course, that Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the U.S. And what does that mean for Alberta? And think about what it means for Alberta. I can give you two experts. I'll give you two different opinions. It's all dealing with the price of oil and what's happening with oil exports to the U.S. You've got people saying, look, this is good for Canada when it comes to oil and gas because it's very much an integrated North American energy sector. Like the U.S. depends on our oil. They take our heavy oil and then refine it in the California as well as the Gulf. So yes, they need our oil. They're not going to do a tariff against our oil. This is all good. Things won't really change. But then you have experts who are saying, well, wait a minute. He wants to drill, baby, drill. Now he can't really affect that. He can't say, please do more drilling. It's up to the companies themselves to make an economic decision on this. But it can mean that if he was to bring in tariffs around the world, 10% and 60% on China, that can depress the world economy. The demand for oil drops, and all of a sudden the price of oil goes down, and that's going to affect us here. So you can argue it two different ways. Another thing people really aren't talking about is agriculture. We do a lot of exports to the U.S.
Yeah.
Might they put tariffs on that? There's this idea of tariffs, that we're somehow immune to tariffs. No, we're not. Energy, I can't see them putting tariffs on energy because it's going to drive up the price for consumers in the U.S.
Sure.
And the U.S., though, does want to be more self-sufficient. It does produce more oil than it consumes. But you have so many questions right now, and you could argue both ways, that what he's going to do is going to be, won't affect us at all, versus, oh my goodness, tariffs. It's going to cause major problems for our economy. It's going to drive up the price of goods in the U.S., but also drive down our economy here. The federal government saying, oh, don't worry, we dealt with him before, we can deal with him again. That is being simplistic, because it's a whole different dynamic now with Trump. Before, he was kind of finding his legs.
Sure.
And people around him are saying, you can't do that, you can't do that. Now he knows what he can do, and he'll be surrounded by people who actually want him and are going to embolden him to do a lot more things that he couldn't do before.
Yeah, he's made a ton of appointments, obviously, over the past week, as you do, and it feels like he's licking his chops. Erica says, regarding the election result, I don't think it was an endorsement of Trump at all. It looks more like a rejection of the establishment Democrats. People often vote against something as much as they vote for something, maybe.
But the thing, that's fine. And we can spend a lot of time, fair enough, looking at the results. Why did the Democrats do so badly and Trump do so well? The reality is, it doesn't really matter right now because of Trump is coming in and all the promises about tariffs and things like that. So this is the reality moving forward. And what does it mean for Alberta? The thing is, I don't know, and experts don't know either. There's people making pronouncements that says this is good for us. Others saying, no, this potentially is really bad for us. And we'll have to wait to find out what it means for us.
Johnny, can we grab that Bill Morneau clip? Did you see this? Bill Morneau, former federal finance minister, some are referring to him as the, was it Ron Ambrose? Somebody yesterday referred to him as the future liberal leader. Could be. But basically, kind of in an interview with our friend Vashi Kapelos, kind of taking aim at Stephen Gilbeault's emissions cap, which is interesting. They're not seeing eye to eye. I don't know if I say within the parties. He's not necessarily, he's obviously not an elected official nor a minister right now, but pretty remarkable nonetheless. Check this out.
We need to think about, whether we focus on energy security in a way that makes us clearly an important part of the U.S. sector that way. And that means we have to ask ourselves, is it really the right time for caps on emissions? Is it that we need to be moving really fast on carbon capture and sequestration at the same time? So that'll be critically important.
Pretty significant. Ron Ambrose nodding in approval. I don't know how much she's approved of what Bill Morneau's had to say or put in front of Canadians over the last 10 years. But what do you make of that?
Yeah, it's interesting because it makes a good point. Because Alberta's against the emissions cap.
To say the least.
They're saying it's a production cap. It's going to hurt Alberta. You got the federal government saying, no, we have no intention of reducing production. I got to say quickly, I asked the Premier about this dichotomy of saying that the federal government's out to kill our economy and our industry, but the federal government, of course, built the Trans Mountain Pipeline, $35 billion. So why would a government that's built this pipeline expansion, Trans Mountain, for $35 billion, why would they turn around and try and landlock and destroy our economy? The Premier said, well, talk to the federal government about that dichotomy. Explain. The thing is, so on one hand, you got the federal government really doing a lot to get that pipeline construction, the expansion done. Then you have the emissions cap. The thing about that, and you can argue all the time about it's important to have emissions cap, but the problem is Liberals are hitting all kinds of roadblocks now when it comes to emissions caps, for example, and the carbon tax.
Yeah.
Very unpopular. Pierre Poilievre, of course, is campaigning against the federal price on carbon. The emissions cap, it becomes a target now, and it's hard for the federal government to explain itself. The carbon tax, you get rebates from that. But people weren't really connecting the rebate with paying more at the pump, and now they've changed that whole thing. I guess it's called the carbon credit now, I think. You get the money.
Yeah, the Prime Minister had I don't know, Johnny, if you saw, but it went on Instagram. They released it on TikTok the day that those rebates were going out. He was kind of one of those like selfie styles, like, oh hey Canada, today's the
money,
but check out your banking, check out your whatever, and that to me was like maybe too little, too late, but it reflected that there's an acknowledgement that they've not communicated.
Oh, they have not. They've done a horrible job of that. Also, of course, the Alberta government's fighting against the emissions cap as well, and the whole idea of the carbon tax. And they're saying, look, that carve out that the Liberals did for home heating fuel that targets more Eastern Canada than anywhere else is a way that this is something that the government is doing that could be deemed to be unconstitutional. So they're going to refight the fight against the carbon tax. But also, the federal government's done so much bad things when it comes to communicating. It's not only the emissions cap and the carbon tax. You've got the Impact Assessment Act. It's a federal act dealing with impact of big industrial projects.
New projects. Yeah.
Well, the Supreme Court said a lot of that was unconstitutional, so the government has to amend that. And province of Alberta wants it to be more amendments, to be more province-friendly. The plastics ban, the federal government's lost in court at least twice on big things, having a hard time to explain themselves. And then we have Trump wins in the U.S., and it's the guy who's called climate change a hoax. You have Canadians, and the federal government is going to stick by its guns and do our own thing here in Canada. But might that then be a problem for us when we're dealing with trade with the U.S., or at least staying competitive with the U.S.?
Yeah.
These are all the questions, and the federal government's done a really bad... Look, I'm all in favor of reducing emissions, absolutely. Climate change is a real problem, it's a real threat. But the federal government's done a really bad job of explaining itself. And that makes it more of a target, not only for Alberta, but people who want to do trade with the U.S. A lot of us do want to trade with the U.S., but this
Obviously,
is something... but this is something that is going to be a potential problem if Canada gets too offside with the U.S. when it comes to fighting climate change. And we've got the COP29 going on right now in Azerbaijan, the climate change talks. Premier's not there. She was there last year. This year, Rebecca Schultz is there. So it's less important. And 85,000 people attended last year in Dubai. This year, 30,000. So even the world is not really paying as much attention to COP that it did last year.
Well, I mean, and polls have shown that environmental concerns have dropped down people's list of top political priorities at elections around the world, quite frankly, and affordability is number one.
Absolutely,
so I think that says a lot. Whitestream says this whole emissions cap thing needs to be looked at like a catalytic converter. I don't know if Whitestream means that maybe Pierre Poilievre should just roll under folks' F-150s while they're sleeping and cut it out with a saw. I don't know what that means. Before we go, I do want to ask you about this. It's not the sexiest story in politics across the country, but it could impact the next provincial election in Alberta, which is still 3+ years away. But the legislature will go from 87 seats to 89.
Yeah.
The Alberta legislature will add a couple of seats. Are you expecting shenanigans here? What's this all about?
Yeah, this is interesting because these things can be really politically, political dynamite or a big snooze fest. And what's happening here is that the population of Alberta is increasing.
Yeah.
It's mainly in the cities, though, Edmonton and Calgary. So you're going to have to add more seats. But if you didn't add the seats, it'd mean cutting seats in rural Alberta. And of course, the UCP government, their base is in rural Alberta. Don't want to cut from them to give to the cities, so you add more seats to give the cities more seats. You go back to Ed Stelmach, 2010. He knew he had to start cutting seats in the rural areas because, again, the growth was in Edmonton and Calgary and Fort McMurray. So what he did, he added 4 seats back then, so he wouldn't have to cut any seats in the rural areas. Now they're adding 2. What happens here, the government, though, cannot dictate where those seats go. Now, what it does is appoints an electoral boundaries commission. 2 members are appointed by the government, 2 from the opposition, and a third, the chair for the government, is appointed by the government. So there's 5 members, 2 opposition, 2 government, and 1 chair appointed by the government. So the committee is the one that determines where the seats go. This has been a big issue in the past where the opposition versus the government, they fight over it, and then the chair is making the deciding vote, and that person, of course, is chosen by the government. What they've done this time around is they've removed restrictions on so-called rurban, that's R-U-R-B-A-N, rurban ridings, where you have a city and a rural area outside could be combined. And you have critics saying this opens the way for, shenanigans where a seat that might go to the, say, more progressive party all of a sudden has got people from the rural areas that be more conservative suddenly dictating what's actually happening in that riding. So it's called gerrymandering in the U.S.
I was going to quiz you, Graham, at the end of this interview and ask you if you had to guess which word is popping up more than any other in our live chat right now. What is it? And it's gerrymandering.
Yeah, so there's that issue right now. Is this opens the way to potential gerrymandering. Of course, the government's saying, look, we're not involved in that. That is up to the Boundaries Commission. But
Sure.
We've seen in the past where they've cut a seat from Edmonton, for example, years ago, and the opposition said, you should not be cutting seats in Edmonton. And the 2 Conservative members, every MLA in Edmonton at the time, no one spoke out against Edmonton getting a seat cut. The rural Conservatives were all up in arms about a seat being cut. And what happened is you had a minority report from the opposition saying this is unfair, and you had the 2 members from the government and the chair saying we're going to be cutting a seat from Edmonton. So these things, again, it's arm's length, but it can be very much wink, wink, nudge, nudge arm's length, much like what's happening right now with AIMCo.
Yeah, no kidding. Graham, I love how you break down politics. I love how you, we won't say dumb it down because it's a smart audience.
Oh, no, I don't mind.
But you help us everyday folks understand what's going on, and it's what you've been doing for years. I want to encourage people to read your work in the Toronto Star and embolden Danielle Smith has voters wondering what she's really up to. And you do at length write about the 2 new seats at the Alberta Legislature in Alberta Views. People can subscribe there with the promo code AVRJ to get half price on an annual subscription at albertaviews.ca. Thanks for hanging out with us, man.
It's been my pleasure.
Good to see you. Put a tie on and everything. Look at this. Fresh haircut.
Hey,
looking
for
sharp,
you,
pal.
For you, absolutely.
I love it. That's Graham Thomson. You can follow him on Twitter as well, of course. This conversation is made possible with the support of some amazing partners, including the team at UCAN Youth Services, and we're so proud to be working with UCAN, an Edmonton-based charitable organization that's dedicated to empowering youth so that they have the knowledge and the support and the skills to remove themselves from at-risk lifestyles. They help young people, we're talking like 18 to 25 years old, transition onto an employment path, to gain training, to get back into education, to help young people out of harm's way and onto a path of economic independence. Their vision is that all youth will feel valued, recognize their potential, embrace opportunities, and experience success. There are so many ways to support UCAN Youth Services, including their comedy nights, which are a huge hit. And if you're an employer that would maybe see some entry-level opportunities to work with UCAN and to give these young folks an opportunity to get a career started on the right foot, you can check out more at UCAN.ca. Our friends at Friesen Brothers are getting set to celebrate a big birthday. Nobody's more excited about it than John Hicks and myself.
Happy birthday, Charlie!
Yeah, Charlie, their sourdough starter, turns 9 on the 17th of September. Mark your calendar. Charlie is their natural culture, crafted from simple ingredients, flour and water. And Friesen Brothers sourdough bakers feed Charlie every single day with 100% Alberta flour, ensuring his enduring presence and enhancing the unique quality of their bakery products. Their sourdough is so good. Did you know that Charlie's actually in the World Sourdough Library in St. Vith, Belgium? That's the only facility in the world that's dedicated to housing sourdough cultures. And Friesen Brothers actually regularly ships 100% Alberta flour over to Belgium to feed Charlie. I love it. There's a whole bunch of benefits and perks to showing up on the 17th of November at your local Friesen Brothers. You can find out more by visiting friesen.com/Charlie. Our friends at Kubi Renewable Energy are reminding you that if you're stuck in a dead-end job right now, but you know you're good at what you do, you're an experienced electrician, maybe you're an up-and-coming apprentice, but you want to be part of something big, something bold, part of Canada's green energy movement, Kubi is hiring through the calendar year for positions in Calgary, Edmonton, Lethbridge, and Kamloops, BC. That's where they're based out of, but they're working all over the place doing super cool stuff in the residential, commercial areas, industrial applications, you name it, Kubi does it. You can check out the careers link or get a free solar quote today by visiting kubienergy.ca. And the team at California Closets wants to remind you that the consultation with their team to talk about custom storage solutions, custom closets, it's always free. There's no risk. You've got nothing to lose. You can walk into one of their beautiful showrooms, or you can check out their website, californiaclosets.ca. See some of the amazing custom work that they do. If you're watching on YouTube, you're seeing what they can do with a stairwell. What, they have storage in a stairwell? You bet they do. Murphy beds, garage storage systems, you name it. It all starts with a free design consultation at californiaclosets.ca. Wow, shout out on the super chat. Look at this. Super chat, Ken, $5 says, thanks, Ken. Graham Thomson has served Alberta for an incredible career. Thanks for his service as a journalist.
You're right. Award-winning.
Man, he's so good at what he does. And when he talks about a source told me, a source told that, literally nobody's more plugged in Alberta than him. And Travis, we see you, $10. Thanks, pal. He says, love you, Real Talkers, a $10 contribution. I wanted to let Real Talkers know, when Kevin Van Tighem was with us last week, former superintendent of Banff National Park. K-Tig. I called him KVT, and I was like, I kind of like that. I hope that sticks. I didn't know, by the way, his brother was the former fire chief of Jasper, but a really neat conversation about conservation in the province and coal mining and just a ton of stuff. I just wanted to let people know a little peek behind the curtain. We always joke about how these are contributions to the Real Talk Beer Fridge.
Yeah.
But with Kevin, a couple of you contributed $5 and were specifically like, that's for a beer for Kevin. So before he left, and I'll let you know, he kept them sealed. He kept them closed. But he walked up to our famed Real Talk Beer Fridge, and I said, hey, pal, Real Talkers just bought you a couple.
Take a few.
So he's a Pilsner guy, like not the actual Sasky Pilsner, but a couple of good Alberta craft Pilsners. We sent him on his way, courtesy of you, Real Talkers, and so thanks for that.
That's just common sense to send someone home.
What do you think of that Polyev tweet? I'll be honest, and it's not fun. It's obviously like John Horgan died at 65. That's brutal.
Yeah.
And a horrible, a terrible illness, and obviously there's nothing funny about it. But I just about spit out my water when I saw the tweet from Polyev.
Oh my gosh!
On behalf of Canada's common sense conservatives, man,
why do you gotta add that?
Why you gotta do that?
I mean, everyone's talking about common sense these days. Don't get me wrong. I like common sense. I would hope everyone has a bit of it. It's great that politicians have a lot of it. But I mean, common sense, why is this the standard for electing leaders nowadays? Common sense didn't put a man on the moon, didn't give us the internet, didn't give us AI, didn't give us electricity, elevators. I could go back in time. I mean, for me, if your standard to elect leaders is for them to have common sense, your bar's pretty fucking low, Ryan. I'm sick of hearing it. I'm just sick of hearing it.
I saw somebody today, I apologize, I don't remember who it was, but somebody just basically said if we were talking real common sense, there'd be no arguments in the Real Talk live chat. So there you go. And Ms. KD, don't get me wrong, she says there's nothing wrong with Sasky Pilsner. It's OG. Don't get me wrong. I have crushed my fair share of actual Pilsner. We found the rabbit, found the locomotive, found the teepee, found everything. Pilsner has its place in the rotation. There is no doubt about that. Tracy says common sense, absolutely not common anymore.
Oh, come on.
You've been hearing this story about Mary McEachern? This is brutal.
Oh, yeah.
This is a tough look for Rotary. Why don't we? So there's kind of this movement. There's a movement right now to help this lady out. Her husband, she lost her husband during COVID, and basically wanted to change his will at 99 years of age. I mean, they've released a video. We're going to play it for you here. There's people sort of coming to Mary's assistance, trying to help her out here because it's a really tough scenario, a tough situation where he had basically in his estate, and there's some details you can check out on their website, and we'll share that with you in just a little bit. You can check out the show notes as well. It'll be there, but pledged $40 million, a pretty significant estate to Rotary, to this, this charitable club, this nonprofit. And then during COVID, at 99 years of age, he, Steve, and Mary, his wife, decided collectively that they wanted to spread that money around, that they wanted to kind of change the plan and allocate the $40 million to a number of different charities. And Rotary is refusing and basically fighting him in court. And, nobody says it better than Mary herself, although I do have a few things to say. But here's Mary.
We always worked as a team. I was married to Steve for 72 years. As she would say to me, every year he'd take my hand and say, "Well, kid, we made it another year." But we didn't make it this one.
Her husband passed away in September of 2020. Rotary was the sole beneficiary for a long time because Steve McEachern was an active Rotarian. And he had previously donated in excess of $250,000 to Rotary. During COVID, that changed.
He said, "I've given enough money to Rotary, and it's time I gave some money to help some of the people in our part of the world."
And so he changed his mind, and together with his wife Mary, they drew up a list of other charities that they had supported during their lifetime. The Hope Mission, the Mustard Seed Society, of course the Salvation Army, the Alberta Humane Society for Animals as well. He asked her if she would be kind enough to set up the foundation and to change things so that the money would be dispersed and that the joy would be shared among other charities.
He went into a lot of length about how he wanted it set up. The name had to be McEachern Family Foundation. And he wanted that done that way to honor his father.
Okay, so there she is, right? You're hearing from Mary and her daughter. Rotary says no go. They basically say, we've got the paperwork that shows that we're owed the $40 million. And Mary says, I feel like they're just waiting for me to die. And how can that be anything but the truth, right? Like, let's get real here. The way that Rotary is handling Mary and Steve McEachern's estate is about as uncharitable as it gets. Steve and Mary spent 75 years. I see you in the chat talking about that marriage, a more than 70-year marriage, building up a $40 million legacy, only to have that legacy twisted by the very organization that they'd once trusted, right? At 99 years old, with COVID raging, Steve's focus was on surviving, not wrestling with red tape to ensure that a list of deserving charities got the money that he and Mary wanted to give. So here's the thing. Steve has a change of heart. Right? Instead of the $40 million all going to Rotary, like she just described, he wanted to spread it to a wider group. You heard Hope Mission, Scona High School, the Edmonton Humane Society, STARS, the U of A Nursing School, the University Hospital Foundation, many others, but he didn't get a chance to amend the will before he died, and now Rotary is sitting in the driver's seat, holding up the entire process. They're not even engaging with Mary. At 96 years of age, she's still fighting for her husband's last wishes to be respected. And if they don't talk to her, if they ignore her and let time pass, they will ultimately inherit the entire $40 million. That's if she dies before this goes to the courts. And why wouldn't they, right? That's $40 million, let's be honest, that they'd rather not share. Let's call this what it is. It's greed. Is $13 million not enough for Rotary? Steve and Mary's real intent was to see a legacy spread across organizations that mean something to them and their community. This is not about honoring donors' wishes. This is about Rotary acting like a gatekeeper, hoping that Mary doesn't live long enough to change the outcome. The solution is right there. The solution's in front of us. All Rotary has to do is sit down in noble fashion, come to an agreement, and this could be resolved today. But instead, they're stalling. They're waiting her out. So to everybody listening, we're inviting you to take action like we already have at steveandmarysgift.ca to learn more and send Rotary a clear message. It's time they respect the wishes of people who have trusted them with a legacy, not hold them hostage. Send that message today and keep this in mind the next time that Rotary comes calling. This episode of Real Talk was presented with the amazing support of Complete Care Restoration. When we talk about the return to Jasper, we want to remind you that a lot of folks, business owners, homeowners, are finding their way back because the teams at Complete Care Restoration are out there working around the clock to restore their properties and rebuild their peace of mind. More than 25 years of experience getting folks back on their feet. The best part, they'll work directly with your insurance company so you don't have to. They take that off your plate so you can focus on the stuff that really matters on a day-to-day basis. They built our studio. We've seen them troubleshoot. We've seen their professionalism, and we're proud to partner with Complete Care Restoration. And before we wrap, I want to remind you, if you visit our website, ryanjesperson.com, not only can you buy Real Talk merch, including the coffee mugs you see here on the table, including some of those Real Talk snapback caps, but if you go to the events link at ryanjesperson.com, you'll find the Real Talk Pond Hockey Classic. That goes on Saturday, the 1st of February, out in beautiful St. Albert, Larry Alexiak Field. We've got room for 24 teams, maximum of 6 skaters per team, all the proceeds going to 3 worthy charities. It is bonfires, burgers, beer, and the sounds of winter on the ODR. There is no day better than the Real Talk Pond Hockey Classic. You can sign up your team, find out more details about volunteering or sponsorship by visiting the events link at Real Talk on our website. That's ryanjesperson.com. Coming up on tomorrow's episode, we're going to talk to Jason Kenney's former senior advisor. I want to get a conservative take on some of the stories that we're talking about, not just provincially, but federally as well. You may remember he was, well, not quite fired. He left as the CEO of Invest Alberta, said he was spending more time with his family. Dr. David Knight-Legg will be our guest. And then we're talking downtown revitalization on an edition of the Real Talk Roundtable coming up this Friday. We hope you'll join us then. Take care, Real Talkers.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard.